Good evening. Thank you all for coming tonight to the 36th Senatorial District debate hosted by the Lancaster Chamber of Commerce and Industry and Lancaster newspapers. Tonight is your chance to hear from the candidates running for the Republican nomination in the May 20th primary. Grace Brethren Church of Lidditz is our host tonight, and we thank them for having us. I am Heather Valutis, Advocacy Director with the Lancaster Chamber. Before we begin, I'd ask that all of you silence your cell phones and any other electronic devices you may have. I'd also ask that you refrain from cheers, applause, or outbursts of any kind until the debate concludes in order to maximize the 90 minutes that we've allotted for this evening. Tonight's debate is being live streamed on lancasteronline.com.
Here to Tom and I will say in advance it's pretty likely that we will not get through all the cards that will be handed in, so we would appreciate your understanding of that situation. We do want to be sure that we're ending on time at 8:30 this evening. So with that, I should say a few minutes ago we had a coin toss. Representative Aument won the coin toss, so he will speak first, and we will get started by hearing you with an introduction for this.
To protect taxpayers, to reform the culture in Harrisburg, to make education more effective, and to protect our community and our values. But we all know good ideas languish without active leadership. To really make Pennsylvania better, we need people willing to push, to fight, to lead, to champion, to advocate, to achieve the results that we all deserve. In the state Senate, I'll keep fighting and pushing to do what's right.
What we see is a campaign where two parties are running in a very different manner. In fact, the style of this campaign and how it's being conducted are at direct odds with each other. We see contrasts in how things are being handled, and I think that speaks very powerfully to where the candidates are, and I think you get a sense of where the candidates are in terms of how they will handle the role of the office. So I do believe that the public is starting to see some distinctions, and I think we'll flesh that out a little bit tonight through the questions that are answered.
Clear distinction between Representative Denlinger and I. Representative Denlinger has taken per diems. He did away with that practice after the pay raise in 2009. I've never taken a per diem, and I won't. I've never taken mileage reimbursements just to show up in Harrisburg. I'm eligible to take them, and I don't. The problem in Harrisburg, friends, is that the benefits of the job are so attractive.
Nearly 5 years ago, I moved away from that, and we both use receipt-based expense reimbursements in how we handle expenses. So we've been on the same page as long as he's been in office, certainly, and I go back further than that. So that's one point that he raised. And we'll get into the other issues as well. I think that's probably a question that will come up. But respect for the taxpayer dime is something that we both hold to. I hold to it very carefully. That's why I made the change, and I think it was an appropriate move to make, and that's where that is.
Tom, can I respond?
Yes, 30 seconds.
I'd just like to respond specifically to the issues I didn't get to with regard to the growth in spending, which I think is a key central issue of our time. That during the Rendell administration, spending grew at 29% over that period of time. Representative Denlinger voted for 2 of those budgets. I voted for the capital debt only after we reformed the system and lowered the debt ceiling. I fought for reforms first before voting for capital debt, and I think that's a key distinction.
If I may reply, as a senior member of the House Appropriations Committee, I will tell you that not everything Ed Rendell did was horrendous. I will say that there were 2 budgets that came in at what were called the Tabor rate, below the rate of inflation and population growth. And because Governor Rendell held the line at that point, not only I, but the whole Republican Lancaster delegation voted along with. And so when a Democrat does the right thing, sometimes we support in that way. I think at points just wearing a party label, I think is too narrow. At points, if a Democrat does the right thing, reach across the aisle and be supportive.
Thank you.
Thank you. Last week, it was reported that the state is facing a potential $1 billion budget deficit as we enter into the new fiscal year. Given Pennsylvania's constitutional requirement to approve an annual balanced budget, we will need to either generate more revenue, reduce spending, or parcel together a combination of both to meet the state constitutional mandate. Please explain what specifically you propose to ensure a balanced budget. Representative Denlinger.
We are facing, as you say, serious budget challenges. Again, senior member of the Appropriations Committee, I've been talking with Chairman Bill Adolph, and we are in a world of hurt. I don't know how else to put it, quite frankly. Declining revenues to the state, largely caused by the end of the Bush-era capital gains tax cuts. Those expired. People took advantage of them before they did expire, caused a bubble, if you will, of revenue to the state that now we're seeing a decrease. And so for that reason, we're in a budget crunch, and we're coming up here to the May 20 primary. You're not going to hear the tough news politically at this point coming from the gubernatorial candidates, either Republican or Democrat. But between that primary and the June 30 constitutional deadline, tough decisions are going to have to be made. And what that means for those of us who are conservative is we will be fighting on the spending side of that equation to keep government constrained, and I will be your voice on that Appropriations Committee, sitting with the senior members to try to rein in the size and cost of government, as I have done now for 7 budgets in a row.
Are there 1, 2, or 3 specifics you could mention that would be a part of that budget cutting?
There are probably 25 things that are on the table at this point that committee will be considering. There are the one-time accounting changes, and that gets us part of the way through the problem. But the unsolved pieces, you mentioned $1 billion, so we're actually about $1.3 billion in total. And at that point,
to get real action on pension reform. In addition, we're dealing with a number of the Affordable Care Act, the Not So Affordable Care Act, as it turns out, mandates that are hitting the state, and so we have a number of those things to grapple with. But there's an extensive list. I think it's fair to say, in terms of expenditures, everything is on the table as we look to balance the budget this year. But now is the time for pension reform.
Thank you.
May I add a comment? I think one thing that has been put on the table that we as conservatives here in Lancaster would want to keep an eye on is the expansion of gambling within our state. There is an attempt to expand into Keno and other forms of online gambling. And that's a position that I watch very closely, because I'm opposed to the very cynical nature of funding our state government through gambling and gambling expansion. I was on the floor of the House in 2004 when we fought that. It was a losing battle, but I spoke out and actually won over one Democrat. It was a good night, at least on that score, because of what gambling does to our culture, because it destroys the work ethic of our young people. And for that reason, and many more, destruction of individuals and families, I oppose that. But keep an eye on that. It's tagged at about $307 million, and with a $1.3 billion hole, you can imagine it's something that many folks will try to go to.
Okay. I'd like to talk for a second about farmland preservation. Lancaster County, as you both know, is a leader both nationally and in Pennsylvania in farmland preservation. Yet in one sense, the state seems to shortchange the county because its formula...
I have been over my time in Harrisburg. I will say this. We have this system in place where we're putting deed restrictions on preserved farms, and that has value. But there is no form of farmland preservation that's more effective than profitable farming. Quite frankly, when farmers are making money, their next generation wants to stay on the farm because they see that as a viable way to earn a living. If we're really to preserve Lancaster County's ag heritage on into the future, it really needs to be through profitable production agriculture. These other things are good, and yes, you can count on me to be a fighter on that issue for farmland preservation and bringing some equity into these funding streams, as you mentioned, the imbalance there. And that's just one of many. Even the social services funding is out of whack with Lancaster County as well. But yes, I will be. But in terms of keeping Lancaster vibrant, I do believe profitability is the root of the issue there.
Pennsylvania's overall business climate currently and consistently ranks right in the middle of the pack, as does our unemployment rate as well. If elected, what would you do to improve Pennsylvania's business climate? And on a related note, what would you do to improve job opportunities and workforce training for the under and unemployed? In 90 seconds.
Wow.
Representative Denlinger.
Pennsylvania does have a reputation of being not that business friendly in many ways. We have the second highest in the nation CNI, corporate net income tax rate. We are not the kind of state that has a welcome sign out that says locate here because you're going to meet up with a friendly tax and regulatory environment. What would I do? I am working actively with others and would personally sponsor a business tax reform initiative where we would cut that C&I rate, phase it down over a period of time, do away with the capital stock and franchise tax, which is a very unfair tax on capital that you pay even if you're losing money. It's very unfair. Other things that we can do, we of course have DCED, Department of Community and Economic Development, to try to lure businesses into our state and keep some here. But you know, the most effective approach is the free market approach, and that is where we let the marketplace sort out the winners and losers. Keep your effective tax rates as low as possible and keep them even for everybody, and then the marketplace will sort out how these things should work. That would be my general economic push, and it's not as exciting as a big government program, but it is the way to economic success in the long term, the kind that lasts.
Representative Aument.
I think you've hit on one of the key issues of our time, ensuring we have a policy in this Commonwealth that leads to upward economic mobility in this state, strong families, strong communities, and the free enterprise system. And so as we look at reform in this state to grow our economy, reduce the C&I, the corporate net income tax, phase out the capital stock and franchise tax, take a thorough review of the regulatory environment in the state. The challenge is we have a burdensome tax environment in the state for businesses. We have a burdensome regulatory environment in this state for business, and we need to rein that in and make it more predictable for our businesses and make it more attractive. 5 appointees, but 4 are currently filled, are appointed by the President of the United States, and they ultimately have the decision-making authority here. And so this at its core really is a federal issue. But I understand the anxiety that folks feel. I hear it from constituents throughout my legislative district, and I certainly understand that. You have a right to clean air, to clean water, and so it's something that folks are genuinely concerned about. But I do think that we have an opportunity in the state Senate to be your champion, to be your advocate, to listen and take those concerns that our constituents have, not only directly to the company, but also to take that to our federal elected officials and be your advocate to get answers. So certainly if anyone on a statewide level can promise you that they can stop the project, I think they're being disingenuous. But we can be a champion, can be an advocate in communicating to our federal officials.
Do you support the proposal as it stands now?
What I know of the project now, I am supportive, but I think there are a lot of details that have to be worked out in terms of, there are concerns over eminent domain, and that is a significant issue, I think, that eminent domain policy in its own right that we need to be concerned about. So I am certainly supportive of the industry and want to be supportive of the pipeline, but I think the details are very important, and we'll have to continue to monitor that.
I appreciate the question, and it's certainly on the minds of many. I have followed it in the news media and so forth. We do have to recognize the benefits that natural gas is providing for Pennsylvania. We don't have it here locally. However, a lot of jobs growth in Lancaster County in engineering firms and so forth has happened because of the development of the natural gas sector. The role of a senator, I think, is involved in the overall health of the state, and you can't be completely parochial. You have to look more broadly at how things are going. And I do support natural gas development if it's done in the right way. Your specific question on the pipeline is connected to that, because ultimately the success of the natural gas development sector will be enhanced or not if the pipeline can move the product to the south and wherever it would go. Ultimately, in answer to your question, Tom, I do support the pipeline project. However, I do feel that we have gotten too far into eminent domain situations. The citizens have lost too much of their protections, and so I balance out the support for that with the feeling that we need to have citizen group meetings to make sure that Williams, the pipeline company, is respectful and looking for the least damaging route possible, that things are put back in place to the fullest extent possible, and the least amount of damage can be done. So yes, guardedly and with full public involvement.
If elected senator, would you lead those meetings? Would you call them?
Absolutely, would be thrilled to sponsor those meetings, you bet.
Last year, both of you voted for the $2.3 billion transportation bill designed to shore up Pennsylvania's roadways, bridges, mass transit, port, rail, and airports. Now that the funding has been made available, what would you plan on doing to make sure that Lancaster County's transportation needs get addressed? And what are some of your suggested priority projects? Representative Denlinger.
Yes, that was a challenging issue, and I think it is a success story to the extent that we have been underinvesting in our transportation system to the tune of billions of dollars over an extended period of time. And, I didn't come to that only revenue tax vote of my career easily. It really wasn't until I started climbing under bridges and looked at the rotting steel and falling concrete on bridges that all of you are driving over and your children and grandchildren are driving over that I put up the first vote of my career that would be called a tax vote. But ultimately, public safety and roads are a core function of government, and I felt that was appropriate, and I do believe we who raise our hand and swear the oath have a moral responsibility to provide leadership, even when it's not the politically easy thing to do. And that was one of those moments, but I would cast that vote again, though I have been challenged in various venues on it. As to Lancaster's share, we do meet with our local district, PennDOT, to learn what their plans are for the future. They had a map highlighting the most dangerous bridges, and everything was laid out such that when that plan came into play, things were fast-tracked, if you will. We'll see much more rapid replacement of some bridges and hopefully some capacity expansion. I do support the 222 widening from Oregon Pike down to Route 30. I think as I sit in that clog on a regular basis that the folks coming from the eastern end of the county need some relief there. I think we need to display a little bit of vision on the capacity front. It's very, popular from a community aspect to say we never want to build another road again. But if Lancaster County is to remain vibrant from an economic standpoint, we are going to have to address some capacity issues. We're going to have to build some roads, quite frankly.
Representative Gordon.
All that goes with it.
Thumbs up.
Thank you.
I also voted in favor of the transportation funding bill. I agree it was a difficult vote to make because folks paying more at the pump is not an easy thing to ask folks to do in a very difficult and challenging economic environment. But we had a situation in which we had crumbling infrastructure, in which we had a system that was put in place in which revenue was no longer, as cars became more fuel efficient, we no longer had a viable system to provide for the needs. This again is a situation when Harrisburg lacks leadership, where we kick cans down the road and the problem gets more and more difficult to solve at the end of the day. We put in place a higher gas tax in back 1997, but now I think we've passed a bill that actually, I would argue, solves this problem going forward, tying it to the oil company, lifting the oil company franchise tax so the price is at the wholesale and not the retail point. I think actually, and indexing that going forward and some of the fees indexing that going forward, I would argue solves this problem going forward. I think our role and responsibility going forward is to provide oversight of the Department of Transportation, to hold PennDOT accountable for the expenditure of dollars. There needs to be transparency in that process, and I think a state senator, any member of the legislature needs to continue to build the coalitions that were in place. The chamber was a tremendous advocate to reach out and to ensure that we're communicating going forward. That would be the chamber, that would be folks from industry, from agriculture, the legislature with PennDOT, and building coalitions and having a continuing conversation about Lancaster County priorities going forward and providing oversight of PennDOT. I think those are the two areas where a senator can be very influential.
Thank you. If I could, I'm going to take the 30 seconds that we have for the rebuttal and just ask you both again, you said one, but are there other priority projects that you would identify in Lancaster County that you would target for funding?
The Route 30 corridor certainly was something that was discussed heavily back at the time when that bill was moving through, and that remains also a pressure point. We know Route 501 going up through Neffsville is seriously overcrowded, need for cartway improvements in that corridor. And each of us as representatives have, our 2 or 3 things that we really wanted to see in our district, and I'm there too. So in terms of us putting pressure on PennDOT for some real improvements in Lancaster County, we did and we are.
And this is something where we've worked extremely well together as a House delegation with our senators to actually sit and have a conversation. What are the priorities for Lancaster County? I think Representative Denlinger has named a number of them, the Route 30 corridor, 222, and then my personal favorite, the State Road, Centerville Road, where I sit. Actually, I don't sit there, I avoid it and spend more money avoiding it, which helps point to the need for reform.
Thank you.
A few weeks ago, our newspaper reported that in Lancaster County, women earn about 59 cents for every $1 that men earn. That's according to the U.S. Census Bureau's American Community Survey. What's your reaction to that? Does this concern you? And if so, what would you do to correct the wage gap here? If you're not concerned, please explain why.
We actually, I think just this past week, voted in a resolution in the House to acknowledge this issue and raise the House's attention to the issue. I think it is something that bears watching. There are all sorts of reasons as to why that occurs statistically. I think the main issue that I think we all need to be focused on, however, is creating jobs and opportunity for all and advancing upward economic mobility and salary potential for all, male or female. And I think we know the ways to do that. And I think, again, building strong families, strong communities, fighting for the free enterprise system, a less burdensome tax and regulatory environment, and an education system that allows young people to
marketplace and free labor sort that out. So I would hate to see the government try to reach in and do some kind of a mandate.
No discussion regarding Pennsylvania's fiscal health is complete without addressing pensions at the state level, at the school district level, and at the municipal level. While attempts to reform these various systems have been made over the past few years, substantive changes remain unaddressed, leading to a situation where we're looking at perhaps a $40 billion shortfall in funding. What pension reform proposal or proposals would you support, and how would you work to ensure its passage? Representative Denlinger.
Well, you've highlighted the number one fiscal problem that we as Pennsylvanians face, and that is our $50 billion unfunded liability on our pension system. Representative Aument began his remarks with remarks about strong leadership. I'm going to say we need strong leadership on this issue, and we need it now. I'm going to say we need strong executive level leadership, because ultimately the contracts with our bargaining units in the state agencies, the state employees, fall under the auspices of the executive branch. It is the executive that negotiates those contracts. And if we're going to get this pension system under control, we're going to have to give a serious haircut to the pension system. I do support certainly cutting all new hires over to a 401k type system similar to the private sector. For those currently working, again, dealing with union realities, we're going to have to give a serious cut to those benefits. But it's going to take a chief executive willing to stand toe-to-toe with the public sector unions, SEIU, AFSCME, the United Food Workers, all the rest of them that the state bargains with if we're going to see progress made. We saw a governor out in Wisconsin make some real headway on these issues. We need our chief executive to do the same thing here. And I'm going to say if I have a disappointment with the current administration, it is that we did not tackle that issue at the beginning of his term. That was the time to go after it when you have the political capital to do so. That did not happen, and that is, to me, a failure of leadership, something that needs to be remedied in short order at the executive level. At the senatorial level, you can count on me to champion that cause and go after that issue all the way.
Thank you.
I agree. This has been one of the key disappointments that I've had over the last 4 years, has been the lack of movement on this issue. The crisis is the result of legislative malpractice. Let's be very clear. Where we were in 2001, we had a pension system that was 125% funded, and now at a minimum of $47 billion liability. It may be in excess of $90 billion in a $28 billion a year budget. This is a threat to our children. This is a threat to our future economic vitality. Our bond rating has been downgraded as a result of it. The time has come now for real leadership. We need to move future employees, new employees, into a defined contribution system, away from the defined benefit system. We need to have a serious conversation with our public sector union friends for concessions to alter benefits going forward from a date certain moving forward to stop the bleeding, stop the hemorrhaging, and then deal with this massive unfunded liability, because it's threatening the ability of the state to fund our core mission and our ability of our local school districts to actually educate our children their core mission. Final point, the legislature should do it first. We can do it for ourselves, and I think it's not a huge financial savings to the Commonwealth, but I think to have the moral credibility to go to the public sector unions and ask for concessions, I think we in the General Assembly, we should transition into a 401k type system first, set the example.
Let me just add, for both of you to respond, we hear a lot of talk about pension reform all the time. What is unique about each of your leadership styles that would suggest that one of you would be able to be the ones to make the difference?
Appreciate that question, and I think it goes to experience and specifically on fiscal issues. I worked out in the private sector for 18 years. I was the accounting and finance manager for Graco Children's Products, dealing with government, its taxes and its burdens for most of those private sector years. I led the accounting, payroll, accounts payable, the other functions that were there in the accounting and finance unit of Graco Children's Products. So I think that gives me some credibility. The other thing is, as a certified public accountant, though inactive by license at this point, I am a CPA, and that has opened amazing doors of opportunity up in the House of Representatives. That has brought me to the table as a credible voice speaking out on these issues.
Thank you. Representative Aument.
I think having the ability to sit down and have a conversation with many of the key stakeholders that are already involved in this debate. I have worked extensively over the last 4 years on education issues, and a number of those conversations have brought me directly in line with the PSEA, other public sector unions, and colleagues on the other side of the aisle, colleagues within our own party, where we may not agree on many of the issues that impact public sector unions. But to have the ability to sit down, have a conversation, to build coalitions around this issue, because at the end of the day, in addition to transitioning new hires into a new system, we're going to have to make some adjustments for future benefits for those that are currently in the system. And we need folks not only with experience, but have the ability to lead those conversations and build those coalitions.
Thank you.
Okay. In December, you both voted for bills to reduce the number of state representatives by 50 and the number of state senators by 12. Given that such a proposal is unlikely to ever pass the Senate, have you considered reducing... Have you considered reducing Pennsylvania's largest in the nation legislative staff instead? Representative Aument.
Well, I think that's a key point. I've been a co-sponsor, I've been supportive of legislation, reduce the size of the legislature. I think this reform in the culture that exists in Harrisburg has to be central to our policy agenda. Reining in the abuse of the mileage and the per diem system, also reining in the size of our legislature, which is infamously the second largest full-time legislature in the country. I think along with that, it's absolutely essential that you have a similar reduction in the number of staff. I think we need to have a conversation about reducing the size of bureaucracy in the executive and the judicial branch as well. Otherwise, you get out of balance in terms of the balance of power, and otherwise then you have empowered unelected bureaucrats who are not accountable to the people as we are.
Yes, and I appreciate that question. There was a time not that long ago when representatives had no district offices. They worked at their kitchen table. They had no staff and so forth. The expectations of the public continue to ratchet up to where this system has grown up, and now each district office, his and mine, have staff, and that's to answer the expectations of the public. Too often, the reason we have that is because folks try to interact with executive level agencies and they run into red tape and problems and hassles, and we end up trying to do the customer service work for the executive branch. What I'd like to see to solve that issue is the executive branch agencies actually handle their own customer service. How about that for an idea?
Mentioning that our caucus has led the way in doing that the last 4 years.
And I would concur with that. I actually chair the audit commission that oversees the audit of the General Assembly, both House and Senate. And so the books are reviewed by an accounting firm, and my commission that I chair both initiates the audit and receives it back. The gentleman's statement is accurate. In fact, if you look at head count within the House Republican caucus particularly, we have led the way in terms of reductions of staff positions. And so we've made some progress there, but there's always room for more efficiency, and I think we should drive for that.
Thank you. Education funding remains a concern for many Pennsylvanians, yet funding schools through property taxes is increasingly challenging. Recently, leadership in the state Senate has suggested that they intend to put Senate Bill 76 up for a vote, a bill that would eliminate the school property tax and replace it with an increased and expanded sales tax and an increased personal income tax. Do you support this bill? Why or why not?
Thank you for that question. Yes, I'm a co-sponsor of House Bill 76. I have been a part of that fight, champion on that fight, the whole time I've been in Harrisburg. Back when it was called the Commonwealth Caucus Plan and it was a 5-bill set, one of the 5 bills was mine. I authored one of the 5 as a working component of the effort to do an elimination of school property taxes and a shift over to a mix of income and sales taxes. In the earlier years, it was more sales tax. Now we're looking more to income tax to fund. We're looking at about a $13 billion total tab to fund our educational system. And I recognize folks, they get excited about 76 because they think they won't have to pay property tax and none of their other taxes will go up. But the reality is we have to fund our schools. The lights have to be on, teachers have to be paid, the buses have to run. So it is a tax shift, and I think that we need to be honest with people in that regard. But do I consider the property tax the most unfair, broken tax system we have in Pennsylvania? Absolutely. Would I take the championing of this cause from the House over to the Senate? Absolutely. We currently have 26 co-sponsors on the Senate side. I want to be the next one over there to help take that cause over the goal line and get some real reform, comprehensive reform for our fixed income senior citizens and our hardworking young families that are really struggling to keep up with our ever-growing property tax bills.
Representative Aument.
Yes, I'm a
Just as a follow-up, as both of you, I believe, for the most part, are proponents for local control and local government support, how do you justify the notion that under this bill, all the money goes to Harrisburg only to be doled out to the school districts then from Harrisburg as opposed to any ability locally to raise monies to pay for our schools? Representative Denlinger.
I hear that objection raised, and I appreciate it. However, on a whole range of dollars that flow into county government here in Lancaster and other programs, the money all flows from our taxes to Harrisburg, and it comes back down. Am I worried that half of it would get stuck in Harrisburg? I am not. I believe we could very efficiently, we would use our current tax collection models under sales tax and income tax, and we would just allocate it back down to the districts. I don't sweat that. I think we need to move forward all the same. If there's needed protections put in place legislatively, we can do that, but that is not a sufficient reason to stop reform.
I think it highlights the reason for fixing a flawed funding formula. I understand the anxiety under that model, under that system, unless we fix the funding formula. But once the funding formula is fixed, which the law would require, if the bill were passed, would require the funding formula to be addressed. My sense is that our local school board members, our local school districts are looking for real flexibility in terms of how they spend dollars, not being mandated by the state and being burdened with unfunded mandates from the state. So I think where we can give greater flexibility to our local school boards, that would be on the expenditure side. I don't think they're as concerned on the revenue side around flexibility.
One of Lancaster County's unique economic strengths is the size of our tourism industry. Yet, over the past few years, state funding that had previously supported marketing efforts has all but gone away. What, if anything, do you think state government should do to help promote Lancaster County tourism?
I do think this is an area where the state does have some role in terms of, and we have fought in the past to increase the funding in the state budget for tourism initiatives. Again, I think really central to that issue continues to be the economic growth and economic development in Pennsylvania, because I think one of the reasons that tourism suffers is because less and less folks are moving about and touring because of the amount of money they have in their wallet. So I think it's absolutely essential that we continue to grow our economy and creating jobs and opportunity for folks, getting out of the way of Pennsylvania businesses and grow and flourish. But I do believe that there is a role for the state government in terms of promotion, because that is something that can be coordinated on a statewide scale. And so I think it is an opportunity for the state in terms of the state budget to ensure there is funding available for tourism.
I'm a longtime member of the House Tourism Committee. I have worked on these issues, in fact, traveled around to see what works in terms of promotion of tourism, and I'm very close with our LCVB, the Tourism Promotion Agency here in Lancaster County. This is one of those cases where, though being a very conservative individual, there is a multiplier effect when you do make those investments. In fact, it works out to about $4 received back in tax revenue for every dollar you expend. And why is that? Well, because literally you can measure the number of visits to an area based on the amount of promotion that goes forward. Pennsylvania has cut this over time, and whereas we were right at the very top of visits, we are now seeing that number decline over time. It is time for us to step up to the plate, I think make some investment here, because the return back to state government, again, is about a 4-to-1 ratio. So it's worth the investment, something that I think conservatives can embrace, and obviously the benefits to our local tourism agencies, hotels and so forth will be tremendous.
Thank you.
Now we're moving to the phase where your questions are being selected, and we will ask them, and we will, in some of these cases, they're going to be combined and merged, but let me begin with this. The first one is, where do you stand on leveraging an extraction tax on gas drilling? Representative Denlinger.
The severance tax, extraction tax is certainly, we talked about items on the table with our current budget issues, and that is on the table. The governor, of course, took through and put in place an impact fee system, which equates out to about a 2% severance tax when you do the numbers. The concern always is making sure that development can continue while also recognizing that we as Pennsylvanians need to benefit from the fact that we have this resource under our feet, particularly in the northern part of the state, and we should all see some benefit from that. I am open to the idea and to the debate, however, guardedly so. And I think we need to be very careful if, in fact, we would go down the route of a severance tax. We would have to, of course, replace the impact fee component, again about 2%. And anything that goes beyond that, I think, should be targeted in two ways. We should look at some property tax relief. We should plug that in. And beyond that, we need to see long-term benefit. And I think debt reduction would be the way to go with that, so that we see not only benefit now, but for our children and grandchildren. Pay down some debt, and that's a long-term benefit. So those would be the two things I would go after. But again, we need to be careful that we don't kill this thing off. I think we want it to continue to grow in a solid way, as we've seen over time. So guardedly, yes, I would take a look at that.
Representative Aument.
I've been consistently supportive of the idea of an impact fee or an extraction tax. We have an impact fee that's in place that is working. It's providing revenue, actually revenue to Lancaster County, even though we don't have any active drilling taking place in Lancaster County. I would not support at this point doing away with the impact fee and putting in place an extraction tax. Here's the problem in Harrisburg. I haven't been there that long, but after 4 years, I understand every time you talk about a new revenue source, there's 100 interest groups standing outside your door with their hands open with ideas of how to spend that money. It just becomes an excuse to spend more and more and more money, and that money goes into the general fund. So even though we talk about targeting that money, and we can do that, the temptation is so great. I've heard, our Democratic friends who are running for governor, I think there's 4 of them now, they're all trying to outbid each other in terms of the extraction tax. And then they have all sorts of different ideas, whether it's for pension reform, whether it's for education, to drive up the expenditures for education. And this really, I think, is at the heart of the problem. You send more money to Harrisburg, Harrisburg spends more money, we continue to grow government. I think we have a spending problem in Harrisburg. We do not have a revenue problem. And so I'm supportive of an impact fee. I think it's working well. We need to ensure the resources are going to environmental impact and infrastructure primarily.
Thank you.
Governor Corbett has softened his views somewhat on the use of medical marijuana in some cases, but its use is legal in 20 states, including neighboring New Jersey and Delaware. There is also legislation pending in Maryland and New York. What are your views on whether sick children and adults should be able to use marijuana strictly for medicinal purposes?
This issue has garnered a great deal of attention recently, and there's so much passion and emotion behind it. The first thing, let me say this. If my 3.5-year-old son was suffering from seizures, and I thought for a second that medical marijuana would bring him relief, I would be the first person standing in the street shouting for it to provide whatever relief that I could for my child. And so I understand the passion and the desire for it. However, as a policymaker, I have to look across the state and what the ramifications of such an approach are. When you have federal laws in place that complicate a state's approach, when you have a medical community that is not crying out and really seeking this legislative change, at least it's not been brought to my attention from our medical community, and even advocates of seizure associations and such, there's concern over the long-term developmental impacts of the use of medical marijuana. So at this point, I am not supportive. I understand the passion for it, but I would want to have a conversation, and I'd want to hear from the medical community and advocates on the science behind it. My concern is most of the folks that are coming to me, frankly speaking, that are coming to me advocating for medical marijuana are, for the most part, seeking legislation ultimately for the recreational use of marijuana, and this is the first step. That's my fundamental concern.
It is certainly something that we're talking about as a society for the first time. We've seen a few states move toward legalization, and I know there's certainly within the Republican Party, there's a libertarian strain of folks that would like to see us go toward more broad legalization. I will say this, certainly a grandmother approached me just a few days ago with tears in her eyes, talking about her 3-year-old toddler grandchild who is into seizures repeatedly and willfully. And so I cannot embrace that at this point.
As a follow-up, are you disappointed in the governor's reversal?
I'll say this, it caught me by surprise. I didn't see that coming, and I was, frankly speaking, disappointed by the decision, particularly his background in law enforcement and positions that he has staked out in the past. So, yes, frankly speaking, I was disappointed and certainly surprised.
I was particularly disappointed by the timing of it. All of us, can grow and evolve in our thinking. I think that's healthy, but the timing of it was a bit odd 3 weeks in front of an election, so I did not think that was the best.
Earlier tonight, both of you talked about your support of the tourism and farmland preservation issues as they impact Lancaster County. It begs then the question as such, is marketing for tourism and is farmland preservation an essential function of government?
Good question. There are really very few true core functions of government, and I will say more broadly that I think we've wandered into far too many areas. And I could be challenged on that question. In fact, I think you just did challenge me, didn't you, Tom?
I believe I did, yes.
Fair enough. I think we are, as a society and as a people, as a Republican Party, I hope, going to need to come to some decisions about what we expect. I continually have conversations at the New Holland Community Fair that go something like this. I am a diehard conservative to the core, but I want more of this program, and I want more of that program, and I want more of this over here. And it's like, wow. I mean, in a 3-minute conversation, where do we go with that? Policymakers struggle with that reality that we're getting from the electorate. I do believe, though, that we are into far too many things, and I think that, for those of us in the policy realm, is worthy of review. And when you start to realize that we can't fund all that we're into, we need to get the government back out of some of it.
That is a thought-provoking question. I almost want to ask who it was so I can talk to you afterwards. Is it an essential function or a core function?
I said essential function.
No. Is it a function? Yes. And so I think as we look at the totality of what we're trying to accomplish in the state and what we're trying to function or what we're trying to fund, I think it is a function. I think it's worthy of our support, worthy of our consideration. But certainly, as the taxpayers are more and more squeezed and government continues to grow and as spending continues to challenge growth in terms of rate of inflation, I think a number of things have to be on the table for consideration. So directly to your question, is it essential? No. Is it a function? Yes.
So let me follow up, and this would give you your 30-second time frame each. What are the core functions of government?
Wow.
Academic.
You know, roads and bridges, obviously, we just dealt with that issue, and that certainly is there. Thinking broadly, those things that individuals can't provide for themselves, you would say a national defense, certainly at the national level. Those functions that are constitutional in nature, that are identified there. But when you get into things that the private sector can more efficiently handle, that government has reached in, we see this happening in our communities as well, where private businesses are being supplanted by government reach, government programs, government agencies. It's a dangerous trend, and we see that happening more and more. It is the creep of socialism within our society. I'm going to struggle to give you a tight, exact list of it, Tom. I'll be honest with you. I want to be fair there. But they are actually, if you study them, not nearly as broad as where we stand at this point.
Thank you.
That's a great question to think about. So defense, security, certainly, transportation, infrastructure. Clearly, we have a constitutional requirement in our state to provide for a public system of education. So education is certainly a function of state government, at least ultimate responsibility. But even within each of those, there are opportunities for public-private partnerships. There's an opportunity for example, in education. I think, I'm certainly supportive of moving forward to a system in which we have a broader school choice program in which young people and families could make choices, more choices in terms of utilizing taxpayer dollars to go to a private, parochial, charter, cyber charter, public school of their choice. So I think, yes, there are core functions of government, but even within those, I think there's opportunity for public-private partnerships.
Thank you.
What legislation have you sponsored that you are most proud of?
Is that me?
Yes.
I've had the privilege over just the 4 years that I've been in office to work on a number of things that I'm extremely proud of. Regulatory reform for Pennsylvania businesses. I worked with a business leader in Ephrata to sponsor legislation that helped tremendously with that sector of industry, the modular commercial industry. But the one that I'm most proudest of was the teacher evaluation system that we unanimously passed out of the House, actually, that I sponsored in my first term in office, that was signed into law, that completely revamps how we evaluate our educators in this state. We had a system in place in which 98% of our teachers were rated as satisfactory. How can that be? What sort of system? What sort of quality evaluation system? It doesn't provide the professional feedback that our educators deserve, and it didn't emphasize student academic achievement. We know the quality of the teacher in the classroom is the #1 in-school determinant of a child's academic outcomes. And so the teacher evaluation legislation also includes school performance profiles that brought about greater transparency around the academic achievement that's taking place in our schools. And so I was extremely proud to champion one of the governor's key initiatives during my first legislative session and see it signed into law and watch it being implemented now. And I do believe it will drive student achievement and improve the quality of our schools.
I would point to the creation of benefit corporations within Pennsylvania. I was the first representative to successfully reopen Pennsylvania's corporation law in a decade and a half. And when I did that, we created something called B Corps, or benefit corporations. And under existing law, you could not, as a corporation owner, target some amount of your bottom line to go towards some social positive cause. What I did was marry together, if you will, the nonprofit ideal with the for-profit efficiencies. Those two ideals coming together to create the first new class created in Pennsylvania of corporation in decades. Pennsylvania became a B Corp state. So if you're a young person here, let's say, and your idea is you want to provide drinking water over in Africa through drilling wells, and you can produce running apparel to do that, you can take the profit and shift it over to help fund the drilling of wells for water in Africa, or whatever good cause you dream up or your idea is, whatever your profit aspect, your manufacturing or other aspect is. So the benefit corporation, I think, as I'm done in the House, will be the thing that I most am proud and thrilled about, because It should fire the next generation of social entrepreneurs to step forward and tackle some of the major issues that we face. And you know, in a time when government can afford to do less, we need young people with vision to step forward and do more. And I think the Benefit Corporation is the platform that will enable that. And we're seeing these registered now in the state, young people fired up by this idea. So the answer would be Benefit Corporations in Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
If elected, what 3 state Senate committees would you ask to serve on and why?
You're looking at me. I guess I'm first. Obviously, appropriations, you know, how we spend the money, I think is right at the heart of all of it. And with my financial background, I think that hopefully would be helpful in my pursuit of getting to the Senate Appropriations Committee. And obviously, being a senior member of the House Appropriations Committee would not hurt. Beyond that, the things that are important to Lancaster County. I've been a longtime member of the Agriculture Committee. I'm passionate on ag issues, and so I would want to get to the Ag Committee over in the Senate. And that's, of course, Pennsylvania's #1 industry at this point is agriculture, and #2 in PA is tourism, and certainly it's #2 here in Lancaster County as well. So appropriations, agriculture, tourism.
Thank you.
I would first want to have a conversation with my colleagues, both in the House delegation and the Senate, Senator Smucker, to talk about how we could cover as many of the major standing committees as we possibly could. I think I have issues and I have committee assignments that are very important to me, but ultimately it's about more than me and more than my interests. It's about a compromise. I think the people expect results. Yes, there's a time and there's issues where it's important to stand your ground and hold firmly to principle, and I've done that and I will do that. But the people expect us to lead, they expect us to govern, they expect us to get things done, and that requires sitting down with folks in your own party, folks across the aisle, to achieve 102 votes in the House, 26 votes in the Senate, and legislation ultimately that the governor will sign. Yes, I think consensus is important. I think it's increasingly difficult in Harrisburg to do that, particularly on the key issues. But I think, frankly, the people expect us. They want us to hold firm to principle. That's important, but they expect us to lead. They expect us to govern.
2 days ago, the Wall Street Journal gave an identified list of the #1 targets for the Democratic National Committee in terms of state legislatures. And the Pennsylvania State Senate is their #1 target in terms of flipping it from Republican majority control to Democratic majority control. And we are right at that tipping point right now. So either of us, there is an unknown in all of this. Would we actually serve in the majority or serve in the minority? I've served in both, and quite frankly, there are ways to be effective in both. But you have to learn the differences between the two. And at some point when you're in the minority, if you don't want to be totally ignored, if you don't want to just be a potted plant, you need to reach across the aisle, and there are things that you can work together with constructively with the Democratic side. I've done that in the past, and if we are in the minority in the Senate Republican caucus, I would be comfortable doing the same, provided we don't sacrifice our key beliefs and the values that we hold dear. You know, you work together where you can, but there are places where you say, I'm sorry, my district and my beliefs will not allow me to go there. And at that point, you draw the hard line and you make the tough position. But, you know, a lot can be accomplished through working together, recognizing that every person that serves up there is a human being, a person with family and kids, and if you reach out to them on a personal basis, it's amazing what can be accomplished using that warm diplomacy, if you will.
Thank you.
Some of them, we're combining some of these questions or trying to, but there's a theme of sorts about mandates, and there's no doubt about it that it's easy to say that state mandates unfairly impact local governments, unfairly impact educational institutions, etc. Could you name 2 mandates that you would work to repeal?
Absolutely. I am actively working at this point to repeal the mother of all mandates, and that's Common Core within our state. At this point, of course, we have PA Core Standards that is in our educational system. I've been a consistent opponent of that from day one. And should I be over in the Senate side, I'm already drafting legislation to have it repealed in Pennsylvania. On the House side, I'll take that language over to the Senate side. Indiana took that courageous step of preventing what is an unconstitutional intrusion of the federal government down into our local schools. And to me, that is really one of our number one issues. You can count on me to be a champion on that issue, removing the mother of all mandates, and that's Common Core from our schools.
Is there another one you'd mention?
That one's probably big enough almost, okay. But I'll tell you, on mandates broadly, I have voted against many through the years, things that seemed pretty reasonable. I would struggle to name a specific one, but I do recognize what it particularly does to our schools, the endless new rules and regs, and I do try to respect our school boards and the structure there, so I do fight against it year in and year out.
Representative Aument.
While I appreciate the desire in election season to fight against Common Core and work now to appeal Common Core, the reality is national Common Core standards were adopted in Pennsylvania in 2009. I wish we would have had that same level of passion in 2009 when we could have actually repealed the adoption in 2009. When I came in, I worked to revise the standards to ensure that they were state standards, preserving local control, ensuring those standards would impact our local homeschool families, and ensuring that we would not adopt national tests, national standards, national curriculum. We've worked to do that in Pennsylvania. The opportunity to overturn Common Core was in 2009, and I wish we would have had that same level of passion in 2009. 2, prevailing wage. Beyond pension reform, that's my next biggest disappointment, that we've not been able to overturn or have not been able to reform prevailing wage. And 2, giving our school districts the opportunity that when they are facing budget challenges, just like the private sector is able to contract, to be able to furlough professional employees for economic reasons, and to do that not based on seniority, but to do that based on the performance of the professional educator.
Thank you.
May I follow up on that?
Yep.
There have been a lot of things put in the mail the last little while here, and this one, I think, is the one I've heard from most individuals that troubles them deeply. A black card with our first black president who's angry, and this has troubled many, many people in this campaign. It is on the subject of Common Core. Don't take Gordon Denlinger's word for it. I'm in this campaign. I encourage the media and other interested parties to go out and Google Ryan Aument Common Core and take a look at what's been said, what's been done, and whether this actually matches reality. I think we've got a disconnect going on here, and it's time we need to come clean with the voters on what's happened up in Harrisburg versus what's being promoted down here in the middle of this election.
I think, if I could, it's important. This is a critical issue, and I think it's important that we respond to that. And folks are right to be anxious about this issue, to be fearful of federal overreach and to be fearful of federal standards. But we need to be truthful, and we need to be direct, and we need to be honest about folks. And there's a lot of confusion around this issue that's being, frankly, done for political purposes. The reality was Pennsylvania has academic standards in place since the late 90s. There was an attempt to move to National Common Core, and those standards, again, were adopted in 2009, 2 years before I got to the General Assembly. When I got to the General Assembly, I worked with colleagues to revise those standards, and I was supportive of what was originally known as Pennsylvania Common Core, which became Pennsylvania Core Standards, which are Pennsylvania-specific standards and preserve local control, which maintains the balance that we had prior to the adoption in 2009. Had PA Core Standards not been adopted,
time's up, Brian.
we would have reverted back to National Common Core, which I oppose.
It's a distinction without a difference.
Moving on, I'd like to talk about the tone of this campaign. We've gotten several cards, questions, comments up here decrying the tone of this campaign. They don't like the complaining of negatives, distortions, accusations, etc. Just looking at one card right here. What are your thoughts on the tone of this campaign? Are you comfortable with it?
I think an election is about issues. Elections are about candidates, and elections are about the contrast between those candidates. In this campaign, Representative Denlinger and I have attempted to make, as we have this evening, distinctions between our candidacies. You have a right to know what they are. Voters have asked me what they are. And I outlined at the very beginning. Everything that we have stated on television, on direct mail, is factual, It can be backed up. We have the verification of what we have stated. It's on our website. It is there for you to view. We've talked about active leadership. We've talked about the importance of reforming the culture in Harrisburg. Representative Denlinger took per diems, took mileage reimbursements, still takes mileage reimbursements in excess of $200,000 over his career. I do not take mileage reimbursements to go to Harrisburg. I will not take mileage reimbursements. You don't, most folks in my constituents and I talk to don't get to take per diems and mileage reimbursements to go to work. It's a pay raise without voting for a pay raise. And I think it's wrong. It's right or it's wrong. I think it's wrong, but ultimately voters will have the opportunity to make that, will be able to decide. The third issue is over the growth of government spending and debt. And I think, again, there's a clear contrast. So everything we've said is factual. It's backed up, but ultimately the voters will have a chance to weigh in on those issues.
Thank you.
You know, it's interesting that the gentleman says that it's all factual when I see Governor Rendell giving me a photoshopped thumbs up. So we've already created cartoon characters to try to communicate some kind of message. That actually never happened, by the way. You know, I hate to say this, but I think it needs to be said. My young colleague's campaign has run off the rails into an ugly, slimy, negative campaign that is a travesty. You know, this is the forum to say that. You know, I have sent out my positive piece. There are going to be more positives coming. My pledge to you is not to not denigrate this process by stooping to these levels of negative campaign. And I'm going to say this. This campaign is going to be a referendum on how campaigns in the future will be run in Lancaster County. If you endorse this kind of campaigning, support it, and that will be the way every politician runs from now into the future. I stand against that kind of thing because it kills off any positive discussion about the real core issues, serious issues that we're facing right here in Lancaster County. My pledge to you is to keep it positive, and I call on my young colleague to write your campaign, admit that this has been a mistake, and put it back on the rails the way that it should be. I'm embarrassed over what has happened, and you're not going to see that from the Denlinger campaign.
I would just say that I would call on Representative Denlinger to decline mileage reimbursements should he be elected to go to the Senate, like the constituents that we serve. He is the only Republican member of the Lancaster County House delegation, the only member who takes mileage reimbursements or has taken per diems. It's he and Representative Sterling. That's an exclusive club. I call on him to refuse the mileage reimbursements, to apologize for having taken per diems for 7 years, because we lose credibility with the electorate. When we talk about being fiscal conservatives and we ourselves benefit, I think we lose credibility and we lose the bully pulpit in Harrisburg.
Thank you.
Well, you know, again, I recognize that folks are going to have to come to a decision about what they want to believe and who they want to believe. You know, friends, it's a decision that's in your hands. I've provided explanations, and certainly I do not believe that work-related mileage reimbursement is inappropriate. I've made a decision at the core of who I am, and it's why I joined personally with the 40 Days for Life campaign right here in Lancaster, and I do my 2-hour shift down on Lime Street, standing out in front across from Planned Parenthood, holding up a sign, "Pray to end abortion," nonviolent protest. I think that's what we need to do to move this country back to a culture that affirms life, and so you can count on that. I do believe very deeply in the Judeo-Christian ethic that, in fact, marriage, as traditionally defined, is the foundation of our civil order, and that I will continue to fight for that, as I have on the House side over in the Senate. Yes, a champion on those issues and traditional values generally.
Yes, I've been a strong supporter of our traditional values here in Lancaster County. Certainly my worldview comes from a position of faith, and I think my legislative record speaks to that. Standing for traditional marriage, standing for life, promoting the family as the core of our society and community and in the state. In fact, last session, when many were running from ultrasound legislation, out of political pressure and fear, I actually offered an amendment to strengthen that legislation in committee. So not only do I have the rhetoric, but I actually have the record that backs up that rhetoric.
And if I can follow up on that. It's one of the reasons, talking about strong leadership, it's one of the reasons I was the founding chairman of the Values Action Team, a coalition of over 80 House and Senate members, bipartisan and bicameral in nature, bringing people together as an educational platform to try to bring those who are maybe a little marginal in their views on these things together, educate them so that we could champion legislation and move things forward. The Values Action Team, very successful leadership that I was providing on the social values front.
We're now going to allow each candidate to give a 2-minute closing statement. Reversing the order of the opening statement, we're going to begin with you, Representative Denlinger.
Very good. Thank you. And thank you to everyone for being with us here tonight. I think it's been a good spirited dialogue, a lot of passion, and that is clear. I do want to thank Lancaster Paper and the Chamber certainly for hosting all of us. I do want to thank each of you for your role in the democratic process. Many here very closely connected to the political structure. Many others just private citizens who care deeply. So thank you for that. I want to ask for your support, your vote. I want to be your champion over on the Senate side, bringing passion and leadership, strong leadership to the issues that we are facing, and we have big challenges, we know that. But if you know what your senator believes, you can probably assume how he's going to vote. We've shared a lot of that. We will be doing more of that over the next 12 days. But it would be a high honor and a privilege to serve as your senator, to serve you in the Senate. And the last thing I would want to again do is ask my colleague to return to a positive basis for this campaign. My pledge to you will be to take it through positive all the way to the end, out of respect for you, because we should not denigrate this process. We need to welcome people, young people particularly, into the process. Ugly, negative campaigning drives people out of the process. It discourages them. They said they believe it's all slimy and they want nothing to do with it. Let's keep it positive. I encourage my colleague to return to a positive footing in his campaign.
Folks, we face serious issues, serious challenges in this Commonwealth. And we need real, bold leadership, not more of the same of what we've seen over the last 12 years. We need more than leaders who will say the right things, sponsor the right bills, co-sponsor the right bills. We need champions. Because our children's future really is at stake in this Commonwealth. The debt burden that we're placing on their shoulders, the disintegration of the family. The times are critical. And I want to be that leader, and I want to be that champion. The issues that we're talking about are absolutely critical. And I know the Harrisburg tactic of decrying negativity because it forces you to not have to actually answer to the challenges and to the issues that we've raised, which are critical issues. Issues over the growth of government, spending, our approach to debt. Issues regarding reforming a culture in Harrisburg which attracts politicians to stay there too long and accomplish nothing. They could vote against a pay raise, but they accept per diems and mileage that essentially gives them a pay raise. They're real issues, and it prevents us from accomplishing what we need to do in Harrisburg because politicians stay too long and they lack the credibility back home to champion real fiscal change. So I understand the tactic behind decrying negativity because you don't have to answer the questions, but they're legitimate questions. I'm here because I'm going to fight every day, should you give me the opportunity, to fight for our kids, upward economic mobility, strong families, strong communities, the free enterprise system, and an education system that is the quality of the world. I appreciate your time, and I ask for your support.
Thank you. I would like to first thank Grace Brethren Church for agreeing to host this debate tonight. We are most appreciative of their opening up for this. I also, on behalf of the Lancaster Chamber, want to acknowledge our partner, Lancaster Newspapers. You know, while we are so pleased to be able to do this in partnership is because we both strongly believe in the role that civic engagement will play in the future of this county. And it's by partnerships like we're committed to regarding debates, and it's by attendance like tonight with you wanting to learn the details of the issues before you make your vote, that we can all be very encouraged about the capacity of this county to care about its future. So my hope is that you take tonight's message and what you've learned one step further and not just commit to vote in the primary, which chances are you will because you've already expressed that level of interest being here today, but I would also encourage you to get others to learn about the issues and to involve themselves in the civic engagement of this community and vote in the primary so that we can make sure that our citizens are participating in the future of Lancaster County. So I thank you for your attendance here tonight as well, and I hope you can spread the word.